fraud is on the up every year. It's up, basis points. We have to be thoughtful to the fact that we need to challenge fraud. It's becoming an increasingly AI versus AI-led type cat and mouse game, which is unfortunate. But I think we're very well positioned to help merchants combat that and give them the very best chance to maximize the volume that they're able to process through us, whilst de-risking themselves as much as possible, as much as they can through Worldpay systems.
You're listening to Inside Commerce, a weekly e-com strategy, technology and CX focused podcast hosted by experienced digital consultants and re-platform specialists James Gedd and Paul Rogers. Get insights into e-com strategy and leading brands, hear from industry thought leaders and leading tech vendors with practical advice to help you improve your online CX. This episode is sponsored by Worldpay, and Worldpay is our guest today. And I'll get our guest, who's the VP of Ecommerce Global SMB, to introduce himself in a minute. But first, let me just set the scenes for what you're going to get from today's episode. We're exploring the key global e-commerce payment trends, and this is really important because payment trends shift. There's global patterns, there's local patterns. We've got the advent of agentic commerce. You've got added complexities of the growth of things like marketplace commerce and payments. So there's lots of dynamics going on in the market. So a warm welcome to our guest who's got stacks of knowledge and expertise in this area. So warm welcome to Ed Harries.
Thanks, James. It's great to be here and to talk about payments and commerce more topically and to look ahead, I think, when it comes to payments. I've been in around payments for many years now, but previously come from a sort of retail background. So I'm rooted in technology generally, but thinking about SaaS and technology and commerce and how payments interacts with that to help businesses thrive in all sorts of different contexts. So looking forward to talking to you about all of that today.
Yeah, excellent. Me too as well, because payments is something that you have to continuously keep an eye on because it does change and shift. So before we get into the questions, do you want to give people a bit of a flavour for your role at Worldpay, and also where would you position Worldpay in the market for those who've not worked directly with you guys before?
Sure. So I joined Worldpay a year or so ago now. It's just coming up to my anniversary tomorrow, actually. And one of the things that's really stood out for me for Worldpay is we are a business that can really cater for any size of merchant, any level of complexity with our range of solutions. And having come from a retail background myself and having come from that kind of SaaS technology space, which is so important for merchants to have right in their businesses, I think the next big important thing is to get payments right so that customers and consumers can shop in an easy, frictionless way. And one of the things that I was really excited to get involved in here at Worldpay was to lead on everything to do with e-commerce, but think about how we champion the consumer right at the core of everything we do, which I think is a bit of a departure from some legacy businesses and how they just think about selling payments to merchants, if you like. And that's possibly where Worldpay historically has been, where we think of ourselves as just sort of selling, acquiring and gateway solutions to merchants. And the last year here at Worldpay has been a complete turnaround really for how we think about payments, how we think about the support we give for merchants, selling products and services in all sorts of different segments every single day, where we can help almost to think about how our products solve problems for the consumers on the front end and how they pay better at different levels of the funnel in different places online. And I think fundamentally to think about how we solve that problem of how you reach consumers nowadays in what has become a very complex environment for most merchants operating today online across social, their website. The traditional funnel has long evaporated, I think. And we're trying to solve those sorts of problems at scale with many, many thousands of merchants using our solutions and interacting with all the leader technologies in the market and with merchants on the ground to really try and make a difference. So it's a lot of fun, and it's why we supported the podcast that you guys run, because you reach those merchants in a way that is so impactful to how they can operate fluidly in a challenging environment. It's really tough.
Great. And then I'll ask the first question. So kind of high level to start with, and maybe ignoring the kind of agentic announcements over the last few weeks, because we're going to come back to that. But can you give us a bit of a view on like what the major kind of trends and shifts are at the moment within the payments landscape?
I mean, one of the biggest things for us at the moment is really how can we enable merchants to just focus on their businesses and to sort of distill away what has become quite a complex set of requirements for a merchant to trade online. in that digital context, and to make things as instant as possible, as quick to get live as possible. And again, I'll go back to that sense of being able to deliver for consumer choice. If I look back at the last sort of 10 years or so, certainly back in my past at, in a SaaS platform, thinking about how merchants were able to very much determine which payment method or which choice of payment happened on a checkout, it was basically just a card. 10 years ago, you'd see a card form on a checkout. That was it. You skip forward 5 or 10 years and to where we are now, and you've got dozens of different payment methods that consumers have the choice and the sort of agency themselves, if you like, with which to choose on the checkout. And I think this has presented a bit of a problem for merchants over the last couple of years, as they've needed to move away from more legacy payment providers into more technology product-led providers who can cater for consumers. And I think the last decade has been defined by that consumer shift in behavior and how people choose to pay and how people choose to shop. That has become really the thing that merchants need to think about addressing right now. So whilst people think about all the bells and whistles and the snazzy stuff, the personalization on the front end of websites and MarTech and all those wonderful things, which, add percentage points to their growth potential, simply by not offering certain payment methods like Apple Pay on the checkout, you are just hindering your potential to sell to to consumers online. So I think that's the biggest one for me. And as you say, you then start to get into the kind of today and the future of that, which is really agents and AI, but it's all around consumer behavior shifts over time.
How do you see like the global versus local patterns? Because I find this really interesting, because I think you can always say like China, for example, is an exception with the dominance of WePay, for example, and then you get other regional payment providers. How are you seeing like greater localization emerging in terms of like payment methods that are actually trending and growing in some regions quicker than others?
Yeah, I think inevitably there's a massive shift towards those regional payment types. And you've seen that in recent years with the rise of Klarna, for example, I guess in the UK and EMEA. You see that in Europe with the advent of Wero now, for example, which is going to replace GiroPay. And I think that there's two elements to this. One is that consumer drive. So some of these brands are targeting certain cohorts of consumers that I think make them feel like they're relevant and they're addressing the right sort of thing. So whether it's taking on debt or it's taking on different types of payments, whether it's sort of account to account, I think there's another sort of element to this which is important, which is the sort of governmental play and the sort of policy plays that happen that drive certain behavior types. And so there's a sort of macro, micro level thing going on here. I think on the ground, you've got consumer driving behavior. Then you've got governmental shifts. So the EU is quite big behind Wero, for example, driving that account to account methodology. You've then got the big schemes which have their own view on the world. So there's a big interplay going on that's determining that. I think if you ignored the changes that are going on in the market, and again, where consumers have the choice to kind of vote with their feet, if you like, when they pay, how they pay, I think you can't ignore that kind of local payment rail methodology that's going on at the moment. I think you would just be cutting out sales if you do.
Ready to grow your business online? With Worldpay Ecommerce, you can deliver fast, secure payments your customers love, backed by global reach and real people-powered support. Scale with confidence and enhance your customers' experience with Worldpay Ecommerce.
Great. And I guess the big topic, so I tried to avoid it a little bit in that first question, but the big topic in the industry right now is all of the shifts around agentic, and particularly kind of OpenAI and Google, also, Microsoft and Anthropic and whoever are. And I guess as part of that announcement, there's been a few companies kind of tied to the kind of UCP rollout and equivalent. What's Worldpay's kind of view on this? How do you see it evolving? And where do you fit?
So we're one of the providers actually right in there with, we're working with OpenAI and with Google on their UCP and obviously there's agentic payments protocols. I think from our perspective, it's about how can we facilitate the most across all of these different stacks rather than trying to pigeonhole ourselves into one environment. And in that sense, becoming the kind of the middle of the operation, if you like, from a payments perspective. So our product teams and also future product teams are working very closely with those providers to make sure that we're right in there when it comes to agentic. I think it just is a natural evolution as you've got more sophistication with the LLM solutions on the market that help consumers shop in a more simple, frictionless way, if you like. Albeit it's fraught with complexity, because actually the work that we're doing with some of these providers, like OpenAI, it's incredibly complex actually making this stuff happen behind the scenes. It sounds wonderful and agentic sounds like a sort of noble ambition, but to get it working and getting the APIs into the relevant ecom platforms and getting them all talking nicely to each other, getting the relevant product data being correct for the merchants on the front end is very challenging. But I do think it represents, think of what search engines did to the web. It represents that next kind of holy grail, I suppose, for consumers to have a much better way of shopping and browsing and procuring products online than they currently do. Challenge is that whilst discovery can be maybe made easier, the challenge you then have is you've got to cater for all of the other bad stuff that might happen on the back of it. So how do you handle fraud? How do you solve the problems of bad actors in those environments where there's potentially less scrutiny of an individual person buying something and you've got essentially a computer buying something on their behalf? I think those are some of the things that we haven't yet kind of explored in depth, because you need the reality of all of this stuff happening to be able to scrutinize it and understand what's going on. It's very much in its infancy. If you look at the amount of merchants who are able to do this now, it's pretty small, and requires commitment from those businesses. But we're very committed to that world, because I think it does represent that next evolution from, as I said earlier, consumers being able to choose how they pay to then being able to do it more autonomously.
Yeah, we're going to come on to a fraud discussion later specifically, but I guess in the context of agentic, the discussions that you're having at a strategic level within Worldpay around this, because obviously the goal is to maximize acceptance rates, because that is in the retailer's interest, it's in the shopper's interest, and it's in the technology company's interest. But you also want to minimize fraud, which is the eternal balance. I guess how much of the focus around these agentic protocols from a payment provider's point of view is around that fraud piece? Because that feels like it's a harder bit to solve when you've got intermediaries to be able to detect those patterns. It's not as direct as it is.
Oh, completely. And I think this is why our acquisition of Ravlin, which was announced back in February, was so important, because having those kind of built-in AI-powered fraud solutions in their own right in our core product stack is so fundamental to being able to, as you say, address that balance of being able to maximize volume for merchants and help them thrive and grow and trade online or in a digital context, and then combat what is becoming an increasingly AI-powered sort of bad acting fraud world, if you think about digital payments. So Ravlin's really kind of core to our toolbox there when it comes to that. It's super important. So we have to factor it into all of our discussions. It's partly why when you look at Worldpay Ecommerce, which is one of the products kind of close to my heart here, as an end-to-end solution for merchants, it comes out of the box with FraudSight, which is that AI-powered solution to combat fraud and give merchants that confidence that when they work with Worldpay, they don't have to worry so much about fraud. Every merchant's going to have to think about it. Fraud is on the up every year. It's up, basis points. We have to be thoughtful to the fact that we need to challenge fraud. It's becoming an increasingly AI versus AI-led type cat and mouse game, which is unfortunate. But I think we're very well positioned to help merchants combat that and give them the very best chance to maximize the volume that they're able to process through us, whilst de-risking themselves as much as possible, as much as they can through Worldpay systems.
Rather than coming back to that question and repeating it, we may as well finish covering this now. We like to reflow podcasts on the hoof. I guess the bit that's really interesting you just tease out is it's AI versus AI. So let's expand that, because essentially, I guess the fraudsters can tap into the same technology that's out there that legitimate players can. Are you noticing significantly that AI is increasing the like volume of attacks and the risks that are coming out there?
Yeah, inevitably, I think. And there are a couple of things here. So not only can you you can leverage scale. I think the main thing with AI is it gives you access to scale that is probably on previously not being able to be kind of latched onto. I think the other thing is that you can do more sophisticated and far cleverer things with AI than you could historically. So if in the past you had more sort of simple fraud, to nowadays you can look at more synthetic IDs you can create. You can be very smart, I think, when it comes to how you create IDs. And you only have to look nowadays at some of the sort of LLM, the chatbots that exist in the market, and how you can create imagery and videos and that sort of stuff that looks pretty realistic, to think how can you spoof a system into thinking that a customer that's buying a product or a website isn't a legitimate customer. And the reality is, if anyone's got any idea that you could address this sort of sophistication with anything other than AI, I think we'd be laughing. Like, you have to address it with the same level of sophistication as this is bad actors are creating with AI currently, unfortunately. The good thing is, I suppose, we can be quite ahead of this, and we have an ability with the world as we are today digitally to tap into so many signals and information. So there's a lot that we can glean from devices, from even the way that we interact with some of the agentic stuff that's being built with OpenAI and through to platforms like Shopify, I guess, where you can get a sense for what looks real and what isn't real, or at least then pass a decision down to a human if there's an ambiguity to make a decision. And so we always have to be thoughtful to that. It's tough, but I think it is a cat and mouse game that's going to persist, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'd say there's been a lot of signs of that being applied across other areas as well. I think online kind of fraud and cybercrime, nudging cards, I think AI will have a big impact on that space.
I was going to say, it feeds into, I think, why there are more and more novel different types of payment methods. So, you look at the way that Revolut's launched their own payment solutions, and many providers have got their own their solutions. So I think there's an element of you build your own solution, you trust the account holder who's paying. Take Revolut, for example. If I've got a Revolut account, I'm paying James, we've got an instant level of trust because we own both Revolut accounts, for example. So there's a really clear method of them authenticating and trusting that payment is legit. I think it's probably similar and I know we'll get onto it, but in terms of open banking and how that can be quite thoughtful when it comes to addressing risk online. I think there's a hell of a lot of work being done around tokenization in all the schemes out there in the market that will help address this as well. There's some new schemes which we can talk about, which are coming on from those schemes like Visa and MasterCard launching in the market, which are designed to try and eradicate card pans being circulated around online for the really bad actors. One of the things that is really hard to address, and actually this isn't an AI thing necessarily, is good actors, just behaving badly in a dodgy way online. And so people who will order a bunch of products and then raise a charge back, they're legitimate customers. They're not bad actors. They're just people who know how to play the system. And that kind of good fraud is on the up as well. And that's incredibly hard to combat because you don't know that if a person looks legit, they're paying with their correct card details, it's shipping to the right address. They're just behaving badly. They're not a bad actor as such. That's really hard to combat and requires really an education in the merchant's business and the people operating on the ground to be able to address that. I think platforms themselves need to be quite thoughtful to that, where they can start spotting those behaviors, and it's a behavioral thing to address, so they can block those customers from buying and, spot matching email addresses and stuff like that and matching addresses so you can block those people. That's a different problem, but that is a problem that's on the up, aside from all of the card attacks and that sort of thing.
Great. And you touched on it there. And it's been, I feel like it's been a trend that's kind of gone up and down over the last few years, but, with open banking, I feel like I've seen it a bit more particularly within kind of native apps and people offering, that as like quite a seamless payment through. But that being said, I feel like I don't hear about it as much as I have in the past in the e-com space. So what's your view on kind of where we are with open banking and what's Worldpay's kind of take and solution?
Yeah, so I think we've all seen the sort of novel apps for open banking and the incentivization that's probably gone on with open banking. And actually, I think we're still very early in the retail journey, certainly when it comes to open banking, for a number of reasons. It's expanded well, I think, into the large average order values. So finance, loans, mortgages, that sort of stuff, or even sort of escrow, where I think it makes sense that you've got that more seamless, easier way of connecting bank accounts and proving who you are and that sort of thing. It's more challenging in retail, I think, for a number of reasons. And one particularly is that the sort of API, the rails that the open banking provision sits on in the market is not as sophisticated as it probably needs to be on a sort of par with a scheme. And so if you think of what Visa and Amex and MasterCard provide for a consumer, they provide a sense of confidence that if there is a problem with an order, for example, they have backing, they've got some consumer protections if something goes wrong. And that's actually quite fortuitous in a world where there are bad retailers that exist in the market to defraud consumers. So there's a sort of a sympathy we have to have with that. I think when it comes to retail, because you don't have some of the foundational kind of scheme capabilities, you don't have the ability to create subscriptions yet really with open banking very well. I think it's lacking some of the sophistication that fundamentally makes it relevant right now for retailers to really adopt en masse. And that's partly why I think you've seen this sense that you have to incentivize consumers to use open banking, which kind of goes against the idea and the principles of open banking being a cheaper, better value, more secure way of payments, because you're really actually ending up spending more money as a merchant incentivizing someone to use open banking for a bit of a clunky journey. I think it should be pushed. It should be really expanded upon. I think if you look at the instant payment regulations that are coming, I think they sort of launched some actionable stuff in October in last year, more to come this year. That will help because it's getting a bit more of a focus and a bit more of a spotlight. But I just think until we've got some sophistication to allow for retailers to adopt it and benefit from some of the cost savings, it'll be difficult. It's too big clunky. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but it's 3 or 4 steps to get a payment done with open banking versus, a scan of my face for Apple Pay. And when you've got that distinct difference, it's too hard to get the consumer to buy into, I think.
Yeah, I think I've done on a few things. I've also used it on Government Gateway for payments for like business payments, tax payments. And it is what I don't know whether this is the implementation or it's just the limitations as you've just alluded to. But yeah, the multi-step bit you can't get around because you've got to go through the proper authentication. I know that section in checkout isn't ideal. But what I've found is the intermediaries that are doing the connectivity, I found it quite glitchy. So I've had times where it's just kicked me out midway through and I've had to go back and restart it again. And I've not had that just in one place. So again, I don't know whether it's just because this is early days and the implementation efficiency and expertise is not up there as it is within the other payment methods. But yeah, I can see that in a retail environment when speed is of the essence. With my tax, I've got to do it. I have to do it. If I'm looking for a jumper and it's not that urgent, I'm just going to give up because it's failed on me once or twice on my mobile.
I think that's it. And we have this all the time. We have this question almost every week from merchants who I think have been sold and this sort of evangelized wonderfulness of open banking. And then when the reality dawns on how you operate it and how the flow is for a consumer, I think when you compare that to the well-entrenched, sort of more mature solutions, I mean, even like PayPal, which is not massively changed for many years, it's a much more confidence-inducing payment method that has been well matured in the market and does a similar sort of job. So you have to do quite a lot to disrupt that from being the norm. And I don't think we're quite there yet to give consumers that confidence. That's a fundamental thing, right? We're in a market where biometric security and Apple Pay gives consumers confidence to shop almost anywhere, and same with PayPal and same with other methods. I think until you have that confidence as a consumer, it's very hard to shift that behavior, however much merchants might like to have that in their payment stack.
Yes, exactly. I think it's similar arguments to the crypto, and crypto, it does get used, but it's not, whereas obviously some vested interests were predicting it would be the dominant payment method within a couple of years. It just simply hasn't materialized for those reasons. Not everyone has wallets. Not everyone has the tech their side to be able to enable that. And yeah, it's not as well supported. I think for me, the open banking bit, the user experience reminds me of the early days of 3DS, and some of those things where you're on a page going, what the hell is going on here? And actually, then because it doesn't look so professional, as you said, the wallet, it's like the Apple Pay, it's so smooth, it's so easy with the biometric. If you get something that looks clunky and doesn't look great, you then do also have those kind of subconscious, well, is this dodgy? Is this legit? Has this been hijacked? So yeah, I agree with you on that. Let's move on to the next topic I really want to have a chat about is marketplace commerce. So, I mean, pick your stat about which part of the world where marketplace growth is hitting in. I read some stats the other day about it. I think even in the UK, it's predicted to grow at 20+% compound annual growth rate. It's going over 20% of retail sales. So marketplace commerce is definitely trending. I know, Paul, you've seen it at some of your clients, not just third-party marketplaces, but people looking at how they can even tap into their own like marketplaces using white label technology. There's platforms like Continue coming out that helping. So the investments there, the retailer side, I'd love to hear the payment piece. Like where do you sit in terms of marketplace commerce? And what is your approach? How big an area is it for you guys, I guess, from an investment point of view? Because marketplace commerce is more challenging because you've got multiple sellers, etc. So it's a more complex environment.
Yeah, and actually, if you look at the way that the Worldpay business and actually now the global payments business is orchestrated internally, it's set up around three core areas of lines of business. So you've got SMBs, so like scaling businesses, your enterprise, so 50 million plus large businesses and global businesses. And then the other core line of business is integrated platforms. And that's really intentional because it's not going away. The US is a hotbed for technology platforms that like to have integrated payments and particularly where they want to control that flow of funds from, the platform owner to the sellers that are on that platform as well. And I think we said it earlier, to get away from this notion that businesses who operate in these marketplaces want to deal with payments as such, they want to sell their products and that's their business, is to sell products, is not to manage payments and flows of funds, all that sort of complexity. So we have a very fast growing part of the organization, which was out of a couple of acquisitions a couple of years ago. But yeah, platforms for Worldpay is big. I think the main thing for us is we are able to deal with the complexity when it comes to things like multi-party settlements, being able to pay out instantly to those parties that sell products for whatever size in those marketplaces, and also handle them across borders as well, which is another complexity that lots of people can't cater for. I think one of the things that this really highlights is, I think lots of people have this perception of Worldpay as this kind of legacy business that's rooted from, decades old acquiring technology and all that sort of stuff. And like I said at the start, one of the things that really enticed me to come here was this sheer amount of investment in product and technology that takes what is actually now, with the global payments acquisition, the largest acquirer, I think, globally. And you layer upon this technology, which has been acquired pretty thoughtfully with the Ravelin acquisition, for example, around fraud. You've got the integrated platforms side of things as well. And then the amount of investment going on into product. It's a brilliant technology sort of hotbed. So you've got the full end-to-end stack, which gives marketplaces, merchants on those marketplaces, real confidence with what we can provide for them. I think the other thing that Worldpay is particularly good at, and I think this really does challenge some of our competitors, is the upfront KYC CDD process when we actually sort of say hello to merchants from day one. There are providers in the market who delay that quite significantly, and actually you can get a quite bad experience if you're not quite the right merchant and you don't sort of fall through the automated systems really beautifully. You can be kind of spat out the other side in quite a clunky way. I think no provider is going to provide 100% coverage to every merchant on the planet. It's not possible. There are businesses that don't kind of fit with risk profiles and stuff. But I think I like the fact that we upfront that process so merchants know where they stand when they come to sort of talk to Worldpay, and we're very clear where we all stand in our partnership with our merchants from day one. And so you can kind of just crack on with payments from that point onwards and get all the integration and stuff done. And yeah, get back to focusing on your business, whether it's a retail business or your solicitor, whatever you are. That all comes part of that marketplace stack, which I think is super important, so that we just get away from that and we help those marketplaces grow, we help merchants get onto the marketplaces, and we help all the flow of funds be very sort of seamlessly handled. So a big part of what we're doing. And I think if you look at us strategically over the next few years or so, you'll see like big growth in terms of e-com from a SMB scaling business perspective, and even more growth when it comes to marketplaces, but also things like franchises as well. We work very closely with them to help with that flow of funds, which are not sort of tech marketplaces as much as they are, you know, a chain of pizza outlets, for example.
And so you talked quite a bit there around kind of Worldpay investing in product and specifically in the commerce space. Can you talk us through like overall direction of travel from a technology perspective and kind of, some of those areas that you're betting on as a payment provider?
So other than some of the agentic work that's going on, which is designed to be more around the fundamental APIs, I think if I look at what we're doing for a SMB, so up to 50, 60 million sort of sized merchant, our key operating model is to have this end-to-end capability. We call it Worldpay Ecommerce, and it's built on the enterprise rails that some of the biggest businesses that you and I will interact with every day will use. And it's designed to be out of the box with everything a merchant will need without any configuration from the moment they sign on to the solution. So it comes with all the kind of APMs that you might need in the UK market, and we're expanding those all the time. It gives sophistication to merchants like multi-channel, multi-currency settlement. We handle POS and online all in one place. So you've got that, I guess sort of an uncapped capability so that you can just scale and again, not have to worry about payments so much as you are your retail business or your type business. And I think it's that end-to-end capability that we're really striving for to push, particularly where it relates to them having technologies that they probably couldn't get if they went to another sort of non-pure play tech-led provider, if you like. And then I think the other kind of key part of our operating model is that we have in-house some of the capabilities that you can't get from a pure play tech payments business. So things like professional services, implementation support, the ability for us we build all our own plugins in-house, for example, so we can make sure that our merchants are connected in the right way to our solutions. And again, just to try and help merchants in what is becoming a more complex technology landscape to have a much more simpler engagement with us. I think those are the kind of key things, aside from building out APMs and interconnections into the sort of more nuanced use cases.
When you speak to SMBs, obviously Worldpay is well known at enterprise level as well around the world. When you're speaking to SMBs, how do you hear the conversations differ? Like, what are the things that they push most on or most concerned about? Because when I speak to most SMEs, fraud's a no-brainer, right? Everyone wants to ensure that there are fraud tools and that the fraud risk is not going up. The finance person, it's payment rates and it's acceptance rates, and the ecom team, it's diversity of payment methods and how simple it is to turn on within the payment partner versus you've got to do separate integrations. That's generally the pain points I get at the SME level. Is that same to you guys in what you're hearing, or are there different conversations you're getting about?
I say that's pretty much aligned. I think the big one for us is that it's speed to live is one of the biggest kind of drivers. So if merchants are switching out from somewhere, it's speed to live. I think cost is always important. What we would always say is that to me, it's always about the relevant or the relative technology that a merchant is consuming based on their size, their complexity, the locations and the geos they're supporting versus their cost. So Worldpay tends to represent a better value solution because you don't get tons and tons of technology you're never going to use, which I think is quite useful. The main thing for me is that merchants ask for this kind of all out of the box capability. So they don't want to configure something. They don't want to have to, integrate endlessly with a solution. They want a quite straightforward out of the box solution that can be turned on. And that's one of the things we really drive for. So for example, if merchants come through our digital channels to Worldpay Ecom, on average, and we're doing hundreds of merchants a month on the solution, you're looking at like 4 days turnaround time before a merchant can be live and processing their volume on Worldpay solutions. And that's a massive turnaround from probably weeks, I would say, and you'll probably know this from having previous conversations with customers, and I certainly did in my previous role before Worldpay, where the general consensus was it would have taken weeks before you get an account with Worldpay or a similar legacy provider. That speed of turnaround is really important because people actually do want the technology. They want the breadth of sophistication that we have in our products and the kind of global reach that we offer and the support that we offer with people rather than sort of chatbots and stuff that others can provide. and they want, I think, a good value solution. And if that sounds like you're kind of having their cake and eat it, I think they probably are a little bit, but I think it's that simplicity. And again, getting away from complex payment tech stacks. I think some providers in the market have done a fantastic job of telling merchants they need to consider every possible complexity and technology complexity when it comes to payments. And so that means that merchants have probably paid through the nose for some stuff they're never going to use. We're trying to be a little bit more thoughtful to that and just focus on our own research, our own understanding of what merchants may or may not need in the market. We're very close to lots of our merchants, so we talk quite some detail with those merchants about what they need, and then try and design our products to suit, rather than to provide them kind of toolbox of stuff they can build from.
So I have a question, so last question, and it's slightly off piste, as I do tend to kind of add in other questions. So how you mentioned Shopify earlier, and you also mentioned kind of building your own connectors. And now that you guys have, really doubling down on commerce, and I think I've seen a number of clients use you guys for both for retail and like maybe a merchant needing to use another provider for the Shopify side. Is Shopify a part of your plan? And do you intend to kind of build out a connector on that side?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would unequivocally say that Shopify is a part of our plan. I think you look at, and I have this context from my previous world, right? So I completely get the value of a platform like Shopify. They have got, I think, a fantastic solution when it comes to the technology they provide merchants. And again, you've got to be the right sort of merchant to fit into that context. But I think if we were to ignore that as a key driver for merchants getting into digital, I think that would be rather foolish of us. So we've got a new plugin coming for Shopify in the next month or so that will drive us more and more merchants. We get quite a lot of merchants to Worldpay from Shopify where Shopify payments for whatever reason doesn't quite fit. But I think I see them very much part of our future. And I hope we can do a lot more with Shopify in due course. When it comes to commerce more broadly, I think, and we haven't really touched upon it in this conversation much at all, actually, when we look at some of the new products that we're launching in the market this year, we are doubling down on commerce, it's fair to say. So if you think of our payment product and Worldpay e-commerce as it is now as a sort of more commoditized payment product, which is quite familiar to everyone, we are launching a new solution that's called Payment Links Plus, which is essentially like its own little micro commerce engine within our payments dashboard. And what it really allows us for is for those really smaller end merchants who have operated historically offline to get into online and start becoming more digital. But it also comes out of the box with a sort of very, very powerful pay by link capability. So you can start to do, I think, some really interesting use cases, which we've had lots of conversations with our partners where they might, for example, want to handle an offline out of stock problem, for example, in a store with a QR code, and you scan it, you get taken to an online storefront, which we can power. And that's something that can be spun up really, really quickly. And what this is all about for us, and this is our kind of North Star direction of travel, is how do we as a payments business go kind of beyond payments, think about how we can enable merchants to sell more, reach consumers more, but do it in a way that's kind of different from the past typical sort of linear funnel, and do it in a way that's about helping them reach their consumers wherever they might be. And so it steps into this agentic stuff really nicely, but it's more about, again, that kind of consumer choice, consumer behavior shift. Yes, they might be using agentic, and I'm sure lots are. But there's also a ton of people who are not going to ever use agents and have that trust with those systems. And so will use social media, or they'll use WhatsApp, or whatever it is. And I think one of the things, again, as we think about ourselves as an aggregator of ways to pay in the market, I'm very conscious of thinking, how do we help our merchants reach customers anywhere they might be, and then give them a link or give them a method to buy something? Because I think that's the next step beyond this traditional shopping funnel. So I'm particularly excited about launching that. We haven't talked about it later because it's brand new and it's coming. But I think it helps articulate where we're starting to go beyond just the pure payment bit and get into commerce and get into that kind of crazy world of omni-channel, and be really thoughtful about how people are operating in a digital space today.
Excellent. Really enjoy this. What I love about payments is the fact that it's not static. This is what I love about e-commerce in general. So that I'd really appreciate you taking the time. For those of you listening, if you want to drill into any more details or get more information about Worldpay and the SMB solution, then Ed's contact details are on the landing page, or you can reach out to Ed via LinkedIn. Look, thanks for joining us today, Ed.
James, thank you. Paul, brilliant strat. Been great fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone as always for listening. Keep your ears out for our next episode. Take care. You're listening to the Inside Commerce podcast hosted by experienced consultants James Gerd and Paul Rogers. Inside Commerce is your fast track to digital knowledge, featuring interviews with leading e-commerce retailers, industry thought leaders, and the C-suite of key tech companies to explore the latest in digital strategy, customer experience, and tech. Discover what the latest trends really mean and get practical advice based on experience to help fine-tune your e-com strategy and tech stack. Follow us on LinkedIn and reach out to James or Paul if you'd like to discuss an e-commerce project. We hope you enjoy the latest episode.